All right, welcome to this month's July edition of the Dapper Community Call. We've got a packed agenda today, and we've got some great guests to come and show us some of the work that's been happening in the Dapper space. I'm just going to share my screen here a moment, just to show you the agenda. So today we actually have Jeff from the functions team, who's going to show us the work that we've just done, where we built a Dapper extension, a functions extension for Dapper. Then we'll have Piotr from SAP come and talk to us about the work they've done of integrating Dapper and Istio. Super looking forward to that. Will show a little bit of an update that we're doing, that we mentioned at the last community call around we're doing improving the Dapper dashboard. Ori will give you a little overview of where we're going with the 0.9 release, and then we'll try and leave out the last 20 to 25 minutes for an open Q&A where you can ask any questions that you like. So with that, I'm going to stop sharing and I'll hand over to you, Jeff, and please take it away.
Great, awesome. So thanks everyone for the chance. Let me go ahead and share my screen here. I'm Jeff Hollan, so I work at Microsoft. I'm on the Azure Functions team, and just wanted to show quickly for the community something that we just announced this last week around being able to use Dapper more seamlessly with Azure Functions. And so if you're familiar with Azure Functions, it's this FAS programming model that Azure provides so that you can create these event-driven functions in C#, Java, JavaScript, Python, or whatever. And so we've worked with the Dapper team over the last few weeks to create this extension that's now in the Dapper org that lets you write Azure functions, so it can still be these event-driven functions. But when you want to leverage any of these building blocks that Dapper provides, making it really easy to do so. And so like here in the repo, you can see, for example, this is a JavaScript function. And so it starts off pretty simple, right? This is a really opinionated programming model. And so it might provide productivity benefits if you are doing something that is purely FAS, functions as a service related, because it will kind of be very much on Rails focused on this experience. So here, this would be an Azure function that's kicking off with an HTTP trigger or a Kafka trigger, whatever. But I want to pull in something like state, and I want this function to be stateful. And so here, when I want to pull in Dapper state, if I want this extension, rather than me having to do anything else other than just say, hey, bind to Dapper state, that's it. And now I'm pulling in Dapper state to this Azure function execution. If I want to use other things like service invocation, you can see here I'm saying like Dapper invoke, and I can just pass in some metadata. And so it's this really tight coupling between the Azure Functions programming model and those Dapper capabilities. You can see here in this table in the GitHub repo some of the stuff it does. So you can say, hey, I want to trigger this function whenever a Dapper input binding, like the Dapper Kafka binding, the Dapper Google PubSub binding, whatever it might be, go ahead and trigger a function. And we have samples here in a few different languages of what that might look like. You can have your Azure function be a service that another Dapper service might use service invocation to go and invoke. So it's like, hey, trigger this function whenever this gets invoked from another Dapper service. My personal favorite one is this topic trigger and the topic action, because this makes it really easy to do PubSub with these functions, which is something that is a little bit trickier to do, especially when you're running in environments like Kubernetes or on the edge today. And so here you could say like, hey, I want to trigger this function whenever this topic gets subscribed to. What's nice here, I'll actually just even click in and show you this sample. This is a C# function in this case. The last one we saw was JavaScript. But here I've said, hey, trigger this little bit of C# code whenever there is any events on topic B. And again, the reason this extension is nice is that for those of you who are familiar with Dapper, when you want to subscribe to a topic, you need to make sure that you're responding to the right subscribe endpoint so that Dapper knows what topics you're interested in, that it surfaces the right endpoint for it to get those cloud events in. With this extension in Azure Functions, you really just do this metadata. You're like, hey, I'm writing a function. I care about listening to topic B, and all of the rest, all of the interacting with the Dapper sidecar and following the right contracts for PubSub with topics is handled for you by the extension. And so when I run this function, it will let Dapr know, hey, I'm interested in messages for topic B. When a message for topic B happens, it will take that cloud event and kick off to run whatever code I want. And so you can write these really simple little functions that still take advantage of all these Dapr goodies with this extension. And so definitely encourage you, if you're interested in this, at least to try it out. Obviously, we're not only going to be writing functions, and so you might be using Dapr alongside your ASP.NET code or your Flask code or whatever else. But if there are pieces in your architecture that are more function-based, and you might benefit from a more opinionated programming model alongside Dapr, this is a great place to look. And so there is here a quick start that I would encourage you all try out if you are interested, and this will kind of walk you through step by step creating a new Azure function app, configuring it to do a few things. In fact, here I kind of have a working version. I'll just show you a bit of what you create, where you create a JavaScript function like this one. So this is an Azure function in JavaScript. What's cool is in these, 32 lines of code, there's actually a whole lot that is happening here. It's going to be listening for HTTP events. When it gets an HTTP event, it's going to pull in the current state based on a path parameter that we're going to pass in. So I'll jump here. If you don't understand all of this, that's fine. I'm saying, hey, I'm going to pass in a route that has a key, like a key for the state. So this might be Jeff state, this might be Mark state, this might be Foo state, whatever it is. And so when we get that HTTP request with that key, we're going to pull in the state for that key just automatically, just saying context.bindings.dapr state, right? Pull in that state. It's going to talk to Dapr sidecar. It's going to pull that in. Then it's going to update the state. So it will append it. It will go ahead and save that state back in. So you can see here, I'm just, again, using these really simple native Azure functions bindings to save the state. And then I already teased my favorite capability of this is PubSub. It's like, now let's go ahead and publish to a topic called my topic. And so here, I'm just kind of saying context.bindings.publish. So really seamlessly, in fact, most of these 32 lines is creating JSON objects, but I'm pulling in state, I'm updating state, I'm doing PubSub, I'm doing this all in a function all here. And when you write this together, I'm in VS Code, I have my Azure Functions extension installed, and I can even do nice things like go ahead and say start debugging. So we'll go ahead and start. I always usually push F5, so it takes me a bit to find start debugging in the menu. I can go ahead and start debugging just like I could any Azure Functions project. It's going to go ahead and spin up the Azure Functions runtime in this case. I could spin it up as part of the Dapr CLI, but I'm going to do this way, where I've gone ahead and spun this up. You can even see here, if you look carefully, it's automatically listening for events from Dapr. So it's like, hey, I'm listening on port 3001. I'm ready for Dapr to talk to me. It's ready to talk to Dapr. And so now if I come back here and let's make sure we start our Dapr sidecar. So I'm going to open up another terminal and just say, hey, let's start Dapr running on my local box now too, so it knows what to do when my function tries to tell it to do stuff. So very quickly, I'll just spin up that sidecar here. So now I have Dapr running. I've got my Azure function running. You can see I have my endpoint here. I can go ahead and test this out. I prefer to use this tool called REST Client in VS Code, where I can very easily just type in a path to test. So I'm like, hey, call this localhost endpoint /API/state. And then for the key, we'll pass in Jeff this time, I guess. And I'll pass in a value of hello. Go ahead and send that request. I hit my breakpoint. I can go ahead and step through this stuff. We can see our state right now is empty. That's totally fine. We get back the response. The state is now hello. And if we update this to world and we send it again, and we'll go ahead, it triggers this function again, and now we get back a response where the state is hello and world. So really cool that I can use these together. Obviously, you could have used them together before. We've had a sample of using functions with Dapr for a while now, but this just makes it much easier. You can use these native function metadata parameters. You can write these Azure functions. So if you're already familiar with Azure functions, or you are thinking there might be benefits of saying, hey, I'm going to use a little bit more opinionated programming models specifically catered to event-driven functions, you can still weave in Dapr and kind of have the best of both worlds. The last thing, I won't demo this right here, but I could take this same function and I can now go ahead and deploy this to Kubernetes, and I can have it now running in Kubernetes. And so my functions triggering and scaling, integrating with the Dapr sidecar. I have a cluster that has this running right now. I could run it locally. This is currently scoped. If you actually look in the announcement blog post that Mark and I wrote, this is currently scoped to using Azure Functions when you are hosting functions in Kubernetes or IoT Edge. So this won't work yet today if you go ahead and went like, hey, publish to my subscription inside of like the Azure Functions consumption plan. That does not work today, but if we're running with functions in any of these managed runtime environments like Kubernetes, like IoT Edge, some self-hosted form, this should work totally fine. So hopefully that makes sense of what this is and how you can use it. As I mentioned, if you're interested in learning more, definitely check out this Dapr Azure Functions extension repo. We really want to work with all of you and with the broader community, those watching this recording or whoever, to understand how these capabilities are working for you, if there's scenarios that you're interested in bringing functions and Dapr together, and what more we can continue to do to bring this story forward. So, Mark, I'll kind of pass it over to you. I don't know if there's any questions that came in the chat or anything, but from there, that's what I wanted to show.
Yeah, no, that's fabulous, Jeff. That's super cool. Now I think actually there's one question that's been posted in the chat here is, does the functions extension for Dapr work with durable functions as well? Yep. P.S. Nice work. These are much easier to use.
Yeah, agree. Yeah, and I'd used functions with Dapr a bit before, but it's so slick now. I love PubSub. But the short answer to your question is yes. So any Azure Functions trigger or binding, including the durable stuff, including whatever trigger you might want to use, you can use this extension with it. So you can augment a durable function with Dapr State, Dapr PubSub. You can bring them together. If you actually look at the Git repo as well, there's kind of an explanation of, Azure Functions has these concepts of triggers and bindings. Here's how to think about what those work, but you can pull them in together. So you could kick off a durable function from a Dapr service invocation. You could have a durable function pull in Dapr secrets, whatever crazy combination you want to use. This is fully compatible with every other aspect of the Azure Functions runtime and extensions.
Yeah, and I think one of the things we're looking for is that it's we're super interested if you wanting to build applications using functions hosted in a Kubernetes IoT environment, and we really want to kind of try and get people on board and get customers engaged with us. So please reach out to us around these things. Lynn does ask, what's the plans to bring this to Azure hosted functions? Are there any plans for this?
Yeah, it's definitely something Mark and I and the broader teams, we would love to move forward towards that goal. Candidly, there's a bit more technical challenges we have to sort out, and we didn't want to hold off starting to let the community use this, especially in environments where a good handful of folks are using functions like in Kubernetes or on the edge. So we wanted to get this out quickly so that folks can start taking advantage of it. But we're definitely looking forward to seeing what the adoption looks like, seeing what the use case, even getting feedback from folks like you all saying like, yeah, this is where we would need it hosted. So we can start to tackle some of those technical work items to make sure that all of the kind of opinionated hosting environments we have today for functions, that we're able to weave in Dapr to those as well.
Yes, yeah. No, this is super cool, and it makes it so easy now just to bring in all that Dapr functionality into functions runtime and combine those two. I don't think there's any more questions here, so that's good. If there are some more questions, we have an open Q&A time as we go, and feel free to post them into the window. But thanks, Jeff. That was fantastic. Really good to see this happening. And as you may have mentioned a couple of months ago, we also did an integration with the Logic Apps runtime as well. So now you can do Dapr with Logic Apps and how we hosted that, as well as functions, as well as ASP.NET Core. And of course, there's Flask, Express, and we're trying to go through all these different runtimes to kind of bring Dapr integrated with these developer runtimes so you can see how Dapr's functionality provides as a building block around all of that. So good. So at this point, then I'm going to move on. Let's move on to Piotr. let's let you take over, and I'll let you introduce yourself. Please feel free to share your screen and introduce yourself.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yes.
Awesome. I will share my screen in a minute. So thank you for the invitation. My name is Peter. I'm here from open source project Kima. And today I would like to share with you some findings that I had with my POC, where I tried to integrate Dapr and Istio together side by side. First question, do you see my screen? I should see the, okay.
We can see your screen.
Awesome. So let's get started. Yeah, like I mentioned, I was here to present Dapr and Istio. And that's good. Presentation will be rather quick. I have 15 minutes, so I'll try to speed up. So what I would like to do and present to you is the outcome of my POC, where I wanted to run Istio and Dapr side by side. So first of all, I would talk about the goals that I had for my POC, my personal, let's call it goals that I set up. Then I would like to present you a live demo with the integration parts. And next, I would like to talk about some alternative ways of integrating Istio and Dapr. And later on the Q&A session. So the setup and the goals for the POC. As we know, Dapr has its own mutual TLS implementation, Istio as well. And what I wanted to first try out is to combine them. So have Dapr and Istio mutual TLS enabled in a strict mode. Next, I wanted to have Dapr sidecar running side by side in the same pod with Istio Envoy enabled. On top of that, I wanted to have some persistence. So here I wanted to use the Redis state store, and I wanted to use a little bit of other functions of Istio. So in this particular case, I wanted to use Istio ingress gateway, ingress implementation of Istio, and has some TLS termination and expose the application to the public internet. So some prerequisites for that, what I have used is Dapr 0.8 and Istio 1.6, actually the latest version right now, released, and couple of remarks before I start. If you'd like to use Istio as it is right now and have Istio sidecars running side by side with Dapr sidecars, you will need to wait for next release of Istio or for Dapr 0.9. There will be a fix that will allow you to pass the liveness and readiness probe. On the Dapr 0.8, I have my custom sidecar injector. That's why I can move forward. If you are interested, I will share later on in the chat. There are two issues raised, one in the Istio for that, and the second one in the Dapr community. And both are already done. So like I mentioned, in Dapr, fix will be released in 0.9, as far as I know. Okay, so let's have a quick demo. So hopefully you see my terminal.
It is. You might want to make your font a little bit bigger.
Yeah, sure.
Perfect.
Okay, so what I have used is the samples from Dapr community, the examples, and I have used the tutorial for running on Kubernetes, where there is a Node application and a Python application, and the Redis state store. For my POC, I wanted to have Istio and I wanted to have a Dapr. So we can see what I have in the Istio control plane system. So Istio system. I have a mutual TLS in a strict mode. I have also the demo profile from Istio with strict mode mutual TLS, and I have additionally a Dapr deployed in the Dapr system using Helm charts. Here I have also mutual TLS from Dapr enabled. We can verify it that is enabled. And as you can see, there are no sidecars in this Dapr control plane. This is by intention, by purpose. I did not want to mix a control plane of Dapr with Istio control plane. However, in my workload namespace, which I have called demo, I have two applications that mention Node and Python applications, and they have three containers. If we take a look, for example, on yeah, on Node app, and we take what we have there. We'll see that we have the Istio proxy as one of the container. We have Dapr and the Node application host running the application itself. But what I have also created and used from Istio is that I have ingress gateway from Istio, and I wanted to expose the service publicly. So in Istio we use virtual services for that, and I have created virtual service for my Node application. And this application, if I go to the URL, as you can see, I have some order ID because the Python application is locally connecting and talking to the Node application. And if we refresh the page, we see that the order ID is is a new one. So back to my terminal, sorry. So side-by-side sidecars are running. We can use Istio functionality here. In this particular case, it's ingress gateways and the TLS termination. We could use also advanced routing options from Istio. For simplicity, I skipped that, and also default injection and etc. However, this setup has some limitations. First of all, this is running because in my application I have used the path, the approach to disable the ports for application workload from Istio mutual TLS. This is done similarly like in Linkerd by having an annotations on a deployment where I explicitly told that port 80 and the rest of the ports should not be taken into account by the envoy. So any inbound and outbound traffic on that port is skipped by the envoy. So currently the Dapr control plane is communicating with Dapr sidecars, Dapr using its own mutual TLS. The proxy can also talk with each other. However, only Node application is able to actually consume Istio features because it has a service, Kubernetes service defined. In terms of Python application, we don't have a Kubernetes service. Of course, we could create that, but Dapr provides its own service discovery mechanism, and that is actually the maybe in terms of Istio not the best part, because in Istio mostly we heavily rely on service definitions to which we select to. But here, if we have Dapr service discovery, we lose in that case a couple of Istio features. So in terms of Node app, I can use that service. In terms of Python app and the communication done proxy to proxy, so Dapr to Dapr with its own service discovery, not so easy. So this is a big limitation in terms of this setup. But that's not everything I have done, because I asked myself, okay, what can I do else with the setup? I have proved that both mutual TLS are working together. I can use a couple of features of Istio in the Node application, but what if I start to play around with the configuration? And here I started to ask my question. I asked myself, what if I disable the Dapr mutual TLS and leave the Istio mutual TLS enabled and in a strict mode? So what I have done also is created another cluster where I have Dapr mutual TLS disabled. Let's see it here. As we can see, it's disabled. I have Istio enabled everywhere, and I have a strict mutual TLS. I have also the same setup of Node application and Python application and Redis store. One thing that I did change in the Dapr control plane is I have disabled the sidecar in the envoy sidecar in the Dapr sidecar injector, because it doesn't make sense, probably in the other components as well, only in the Dapr operator. But for this demo purpose, I just disable only in the sidecar injector. In my workload namespace called also demo, I have as well three containers running for each pod, and all together. And in the Redis system, I have also pods hosting Redis master, Redis slave, but also with Envoy sidecars. And here I also created a virtual service to have it exposed publicly. This is the different URL, but also if we see, I'm able to access from external internet, from public internet, my application. Here in this setup are also some drawbacks. First of all, I have enabled sidecar everywhere. So I have also in the Dapr control plane. So that means that I also have increased resource consumption. For any workloads that cannot have an Istio sidecar, we need to create destination rule and peer authentication, which are the custom resources in Istio to configure the mutual TLS behavior. And yeah, having Istio sidecar everywhere may not always work. On paper it works, but yeah, sometimes we have issues, especially, for example, with some kind of databases where we don't want to have this Istio sidecar. Well, like I mentioned also before, in the second variant I have in the Dapr control plane, I did not enable the Istio Envoy sidecar in the Dapr sidecar injector. But also, I think that probably in the Sentry, it's not needed, but it's for sure needed in the Dapr operator. But what if we disable the mutual TLS of Istio and leave the Dapr mutual TLS enabled? Well, here I don't have a live demo. I don't have a live cluster, but on paper it works. We just need to have in mind that if we disable the Istio mutual TLS, some features of Istio, like for example, support for request authorization, requires the Istio mutual TLS to be enabled. So we will be able to host both sidecars and consume a couple of features of Istio, but not everything will work. In this particular case, Istio mutual TLS is required. Sorry. That's basically it from my side. Maybe one thing also to share, sorry for the chaos. In the second scenario where I had the Istio mutual TLS enabled and Dapr sidecar disabled, the application setup is very similar, but this time I did not exclude the application ports. So previously I had excluded the inbound and outbound ports. Here I leave it entirely to capture by Envoy. The Istio init container modifies the IP table, so all the traffic goes via Envoy. And this is the main change and the only change to the first variant that I have shown you. On top of that, we can also, like in the Linkerd, we can also use Kiali, which is a UI for Istio Service Mesh, where we also have graphs for the traffic. I can show it to you as well. And if I make some graph here, and I will start to make some traffic here. In a second, we should see a graph displayed. Yeah, here we have the graph for also for Dapr control plane, but also we see the traffic going through the ingress to my node application. And we can also include Redis system here if you like to. So this is a feature of Istio as well. I noticed that on community call where there was an example of Linkerd. Something similar was also presented. So here we also have this functionality in terms of Istio.
Very good. So in the first example, you used Istio as an ingress gateway, and then in the second example, you used it as a mesh for all your communication. Is that right?
Yeah, almost yes. Because in the first example, and I have limited the ports, so I excluded the ports of Dapr to be not captured by the Envoy. But still, you can use some features of Istio if you have a Kubernetes service. In the second example, I enabled the Istio sidecar everywhere except Dapr sidecar injector, and then everything, all the traffic is captured by the Envoy, and you can use all the custom resources of Istio to manipulate the traffic and configure it.
Yes. So those were sort of the two configuration examples you did.
Yes. Yeah.
Yeah, I was just trying to kind of describe those, because I think one of the questions was it'd be good to see a sort of an architecture diagram, which I think you sort of generated now in some ways at the end to kind of envision the two scenarios around these things. Yes.
Yes, definitely. Yeah, good point. I think I can create some maybe a quick short documentation for that, and I can later on share it via some pull request to your repository if you have such.
Yeah. I mean, what we should do is maybe come back in the future after we've got this all integrated and show another demo and show some diagrams then. But this is super cool. So, you know, this is it's amazing work, because it kind of helps with how we showed the Linkerd example in a few community calls back, where we just use Linkerd just as a mesh to do all the network traffic. And then here now you're showing it in two different scenarios, where one is an ingress and one is the second is just using it as all the network traffic.
Yeah, and I think we also want to get all of that documented for sure, so that people know how to run, Dapr with Linkerd and Dapr with Istio.
Yes.
This work is going to be crucial to that documentation for our users. Yeah.
Yes. Super cool. So a couple of questions. One is, given that Dapr sidecar uses sidecar architecture, do you envision an architecture without a separate service mesh such as Istio proxy, but have the same set of features as Dapr itself? So we've talked about this before. Generally, we see Dapr working well with all service meshes. At the moment in time, there is an overlap of some of the features, particularly around some of the service invocation and tracing and diagnostics. But if you want a service mesh for sort of policy-based routing, Dapr doesn't do that today. Will it do one day? Maybe it might go there. We'll see how it goes, but it doesn't do that today. So you just have to sort of pick and choose what is important for your functionality. So there is certainly an overlap, but at this point in time, I guess Dapr may go there one day, but they do have separate capabilities. Yeah, this is super cool. So you got a question about architecture diagrams. Any other questions people want to ask before we move on? Well, thanks. We've still got time at the end. This was really good, and we're going to get this all documented. Thanks, Peter. That was amazing work, especially taking all the time to investigate the issues both on the Dapr side and on the Istio side. And hopefully, when we get those both synchronized and the docs around these things, we'll make it super easy to have a demo, samples, I should say, to put this all together, along with all the other service meshes that we're interested in working with, like Console and Linkerd. Okay, thank you. All right, I'm looking at time. So Will, let's put you up next to talk about the Dapr dashboard.
All right, yeah, thanks, Mark. So yeah, I'm just going to show a few new features on the Dapr dashboard side. And we're definitely just looking for a lot of feedback from the community on, what we'd like to see, and what you like and what you don't like about changes to the dashboard. So first thing is in the 0.9 release, I believe, there's going to be a new CLI command here. You'll see a Dapr dashboard -K. So using this command, if we spin it up, we see that our dashboard is port forwarded to port 8080, and we automatically open up to our dashboard. So this is the look of the new dashboard overview page. So those of you who attended the community call last week, or maybe played with the dashboard on your own time, have seen the last look of the dashboard. So yeah, the overall look and feel has been updated. So on the front page here, we can see we have like a dashboard control plane overview where we see our Dapper version and our Dapper status. Of course, if any of our Dapper system sidecars have any issues, then we will show like an unhealthy status. So if we navigate to more information, we can see, as expected, a lot more information on the control plane services, such as the sidecar injector and the operator. So here we can see the healthiness of each of the systems independently, as well as their versions and where they're located on the cluster. So also on the front page of the dashboard, we can see this table here with the applications that we're running. So for example, this is one of the samples. It's the third one, the distributed calculator. So if we want to see more information on this application, this is a Go application that, I mean, it basically adds two numbers together. So, but we can see all the interesting metadata and all the information related to this application, such as its Dapr HTTP port and its age and its ID. Like I said, we've also got our metadata, specifically with our Dapr annotations. So we can see this is pulled straight from this metadata from the Kubernetes deployment. So you can see the whole thing here, but we also have these tabs here to show specifically Dapr annotations as well as its labels, so on and so forth. So, and we also have logs where we can view the each of the logs by its severity. We can refresh our logs to make sure that there's no issues. Of course, you know, there's no fatal issues here. Okay, so moving on, we also have a Dapper Components tab here, and it will show us essentially just whatever Dapper components we have hooked up to our system. So in my case, I have a Redis state store that I'm using in this application, as well as a message bus, so for pub sub functionality. So this just gives us a general overview of the components that are in our system. And then finally, we have our configurations. So in this case, I only have one configuration. It's just the default configuration. But if you add any extra Dapper configurations, you can also see them in this table. Yeah, and so that's about it for the current state of the dashboard. So like I said, we're definitely looking for community feedback, and yeah, and you're the community. So, you know, tell us what you want to see in the dashboard and let us know what we can do better for everybody. So yeah, I guess I'll open it up to questions.
Very nice. Yeah, are there any questions for Will? Things you'd like to see? If there are, I mean, still post them in the repo if you want to ask for suggestions inside there as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Feel free to pull up an issue in the repo as well. It's just in the main root. It's called dashboard. So yeah, work in progress, but we'd definitely like to see community interaction.
Yeah. Yeah, the goal we're trying to make sure is that we have a good sort of ops experience with Dapr as well as a developer experience. You can fill up the dashboard and have an operator's experience to sort of manage your environments and see what's running inside it all. So that's the goal of the dashboard.
Yeah, and I totally forgot actually that we do have a standalone version. It's to run standalone apps. I mean, it essentially shows the same things, but obviously we'll have less functionality because of these are all Kubernetes specific information, but we do have a release packaged for a standalone as well.
Okay, great. Thanks, Will.
All right, thank you.
All right, and then just last up, Ori, we'll just give it, before we get to open Q&A, Ori, if you'd just like to talk about where we are going to be with the 0.9 release, and then we'll open up for questions.
Yes, let me do that real quick. Share my screen. Yeah, so if you've been following along the way we do releases, then we got, for each release, we got a milestone plan where you can see the dates of what we're planning to do. So you can see that we're planning to release 0.9 Thursday next week on the 16th. And these are kind of like the major things that when we set up this milestone plan, we were kind of calling out as highlights. But actually, if you go to the projects, you can look at the actual projects and see things that we're working on. So you're going to see some work items that have to do with the dashboard, for example, that Will just showed, as well as some bug fixes that we're doing. There's a few kind of interesting components been contributed recently, like the local secret store, and some really some good stuff, as well as transactional state store for actors, specifically with Cosmos DB. It's been a request from the community. So a bunch of good stuff. Obviously, all of the things that come out are going to be detailed in the release notes, and that's going to come out next week. Hopefully, all goes well. So yeah, so that's always a good way to kind of track what's going on. As we always say, if you want to contribute yourself, a good place to start is these issues across the different repos that are marked with good first issue. We love having contributions and having people both open issues and also jump on existing ones and helping us work through them. So that's it about 0.9. More on that next week, I guess. So.
Yeah, okay, fantastic. So that's a good preview about where we're going. So with that, we got time for some questions. As always, with the open Q&A, if you want to open up your mic, raise your hand and feel free to speak that way. Or feel free to post things inside the chat window. We like the conversations. We just have to log down the conversations just because we want to make sure that we control who asks which question when, but feel free to open up and ask it that way. We do have a couple of questions already. One which was posted, which was, does Dapper have a comparable functionality orchestration framework such as the Netflix Conductor, Apache Airflow, and the Uber Cadence? I realize Dapper targets resource abstractions, works from the bottom up to provide a portable runtime, but curious how far it goes. I know, Jeroen, do you want to jump on that one, or?
Yeah. So we do. We released. I don't remember when we released. Like last month, I think. Dapper workflows. So Netflix Conductor, Apache Airflow, and Cadence are more like workflow orchestrators. So yes, we did release something which is called Dapper Workflows, which lets you create workflows using Azure Logic Apps, which can be run outside of Azure. But then we're also looking at the CNCF committee for the workflow spec. So there is an attempt in the CNCF to create this specification for serverless workflows. So like you said correctly, Dapper really relies upon open standards. And if we see that the workflow specification is becoming something that Dapper can provide an entry point into, then you'll probably see Dapper providing, more workflow engine implementations, maybe such as Conductor or Airflow, or even some, native workflow capabilities of Dapper. But all that remains to be seen. But the answer right now is yes, you can launch workflows with Dapper Workflows. I'll put the link to the repository in the chat window.
Okay, fantastic. Good question. Yes. Yeah, we're very keen on workflows and making sure we work with them. Another question is, are you aware of any early adopters, other OS projects using Dapper? Yes, this question comes up very frequently. I mean, our whole goal at this point in time is to drive towards a 1.0 release for Dapper this year. And actually, we're working pretty closely with about 10 customers who are taking Dapper into production scenarios, and that's where we're using a lot of the strong validation to give us confidence around this. So yes, and if you're interested in becoming one of those customers and helping us work closely with us, we're more than happy to reach out with you and sort of have meetings, look at design sessions, and help you with your project or your solution.
May I ask a question directly?
Yes, Phil, go ahead.
Okay, awesome. Question regarding the component and the state store. Like for example, Redis. Currently, we need to put the passwords in the custom resource. Are there any plans to change it so this sensitive data like password will not be on the custom resource level?
Are you saying putting out the passwords directly inside the YAML file? You're talking about that?
Yeah.
So you don't actually have to have the passwords directly in the YAML file. You can do a password secret reference and reference a secret that's stored externally into an external secret store. So there are examples inside the documentation there, so that any secret information can be stored either aside, for example, inside a Kubernetes secret store or in something like Key Vault or HashiCorp Vault, and then reference that secret at runtime, and it will pull it down and use it all. So merely as sort of convenience, sometimes at developer time you put the password in there, but certainly in your production scenario you should never have the secrets directly in the component files themselves. Yeah, so I think Yaron's just posted a link to the how-to there of how to put secrets that are referenced from inside externalized secret stores. So yes, that's something that we do. In fact, next in a future community call, we're going to dive deeper into. We just had a security audit done on Dapper and its whole code base from an external third party, and we didn't have time for this call, but in a future call, we're going to go through what that security audit entailed, covering things like the capabilities to make sure that you run your application securely, as well as any threats and mitigations on the code base of Dapper itself. So next question was, let's say it might be easy if you want to open up your call, Mike can ask these questions rather than me read them out, but the bindings category of components seems to be a very generic catch-all. There's even some overlap between bindings, pub, sub, and state. What's the plan future here? Do you have any plans to break out any more specialized component interfaces, databases, for example?
Can I take this, Mark?
Yes, by all means, yes.
All right, thank you. Yeah, very good observation and question, Kenny, thanks. So bindings really, they're sort of different from the other Dapper components in which that they're supposed to, let's say, expose more of the features of the binding to the user. And yes, their goal is to be able to have you invoke or trigger from any external system without imposing a very strict API model like the rest of the Dapper components. So one thing that we did in the last release, which maybe we have not communicated pretty well, is that instead of just having bindings be able to trigger your app and you being able to just invoke the binding one way, we actually opened up the bindings to be able to have specific implementations. So for example, today you can write an extension for a binding that says delete those types of resources for that binding or get, or do any other type of custom operation. So yes, we are looking at making bindings more specialized components and have custom interfaces to them. So for example, if you're looking at a database, we have, let's say, I'm just throwing out an example, right? Cosmos DB as a binding. We don't have SQL queries today on the state implementation of Cosmos because the Dapper API model for state doesn't support queries. But what you can do with a binding, for example, is write a query operation for the Cosmos DB binding where you can pass in a specific SQL query for Cosmos DB and then use the Cosmos binding to perform a query against the database. So that's possible with 0.8. We don't actually have implementation of bidirectional bindings, which is what we call them really, but it's in there, and you're likely to see more and more these generalized special types of use cases for bindings. So yes, we have been thinking about it, and we're gonna invest some effort in that too.
Great question. I skipped over one. It says, will Dapper be available in Azure AKS at some point? Well, the answer is you can deploy it right now as a Helm chart. Will it be nicely more integrated? Yes, that's a direction we certainly would like to go. Yeah, AKS is a concept of you can building out extensions. And so we are certainly talking closely with the AKS team, and there is certainly a direction. There's not immediately plans right now, but there certainly is a direction where you can imagine going up into AKS, the service, and saying enable Dapper for this and deploy it inside my cluster. To a large degree, we've got to get this to a Dapper 1.0 release first to make sure we have a stable release, and then you'll see these integrations happen inside services themselves. So it's kind of more like a next year thing, really, once we got past the Dapper 1.0 release, before you start to see it in all the Azure services. Then there's another question here. One question regarding invoking external HTTP APIs. are there any plans to extend the HTTP binding with different authentication options? The use case is to utilize some kind of credentials, preferably stored in a secret, in order to call an API of an external system. Jeroen, is this answered by kind of thinking about middleware?
Yeah, so middleware is really where a request comes into Dapr. He's talking about the HTTP binding, which
Yes.
lets an application invoke an external HTTP endpoint. So actually, this might also tie into the bidirectional bindings. We might be able to extend the HTTP binding with authentication policies if we want to do that. That's certainly an option. If you have a scenario and a use case for it, please feel free to open an issue and we can just follow up from there.
Yes. Peter asks, you plan to provide extensibility layer in Dapr that will not require developers to compile Dapr, rather use some kind of dynamically configured adapters. Can't say I fully understand your question here, Peter. Are you asking?
In Istio, there was a pattern when Mixer was in place that there were out of process adapters where you could create your own adapter for extending the Istio features without the need to compile Istio itself. Currently, if I would like to add something to Dapr, I need to compile everything. And do you plan to provide some extensibility layer in the future?
So this is kind of thinking about particularly, are you talking about particularly around components or just everything in general? So, I mean, one of the questions might be, is it, everything right now is a compile time binary that gets all built into a single executable that gets run, or a single binary. So that's kind of the direction we are at the moment. Yeah, I mean, we've been thinking about how it can be componentized around some things, but the issue here is in some degree is supporting different OSs and how we can do that, particularly with Golang. So, I mean, Jeroen, I don't know if you want to jump in here and talk about any of this.
This is a big topic, so I don't think we have time for it. But I'll try to find the issue which tracks it and post it in the chat window.
Yes, let's just say we're thinking through this at this point in time, but we don't have any answers. You ask another question. Do you plan to extend Dapr injection policy to follow similar patterns like Istio? Global injection policy per namespace injection policy. I currently need to add an annotation in every deployment.
Yeah, I think that's a good idea. So if you can, for example, label a namespace, and then you don't have to annotate your YAML specifically. You can just label an entire namespace, and Dapr will be automatically injected. The thing is, you'll probably still need individual annotations for things like port, because Dapr might talk to your application, which in that case you might want to tell Dapr which port your application is listening on. So in the case that Dapr needs to invoke the application, you might not always get away with not having any annotation, but yeah, that's something doable that you can consider. Again, open an issue for it.
Yes,
that's the takeaway.
Yes,
all your desires need to turn into issues.
Okay, keep scrolling down here. Oh, it looks like we've just got replies to some of those questions. So we have a couple more minutes. If anyone else wants to jump in and ask some things, feel free to post them in the chat window, or we can call this done for now.
So I have one more question.
Yeah.
I promise it's the last one. So I noticed that there are middlewares and there are the concept for the request authentication, which is awesome. JOT tokens and auto-access tokens currently supported, but do you have any plans for certificates? Like, for example, maybe SPIFFE?
So we might consider SPIFFE for identity of the services to carry around. And there we might use SPIFFE certificates, if that's what you're asking.
So yeah, I guess that you refer to the mutual internal mutual test, but what I would like, for example, also to ask, let's assume I have two applications, and I would like to have communication with them done using the one application is external application deployed out of the cluster, and yeah, the incoming request contains certificates, and I would like to validate that on Dapr level.
Yeah, I think in that case, what we encourage for you to do is to use software components that are targeted for that. So an ingress controller to be able to verify the certificate, an ingress gateway probably, which will have Dapr itself as a sidecar. It'll validate the certificate and then forward the traffic using Dapr with MTLS all the way through to the required Dapr service. Does that make sense?
Yeah, I did. Yeah, I had exactly the same case with Istio, but yeah, wanted to just know if there are plans to support such thing in Dapr directly.
Yeah, so that would probably mean that Dapr would expose some ingress capabilities. I mean, that's interesting. We can look into that. But currently, we really enjoy the fact we can literally Dapprize everything, right? So if we can Dapprize an ingress controller, we can just, you know, take the best features in that and have it integrate with Dapr.
Yeah.
Okay. Thank you.
We've got a chance for one more question. Anthony, if you've got, I unmuted you if you're still here and if you want to ask your question. Oh, hang on, let me unmute you again. If someone can unmute Anthony, here we go. All right, there we go. Right.
Yeah. Hi, sorry about that. So I was wondering if you could kind of reiterate in the ways that Dapr can make microservice local development easier. And I realize there's some overlap with the project Thai that's doing kind of trying to do the same thing, and particularly kind of what you see as the end result of that. I mean, in manifesting in Visual Studio, would that be just the simple clicking of the run button and everything just kind of works, or how do you ultimately see that developer experience?
Yeah, I mean, Dapr is focused on the developer coding experience. So it's how we can provide a set of capabilities through APIs and these building blocks so that you can build and develop, you know, microservice applications easier. It's not concerned with any way in terms of how you describe your application, how you kind of deploy that application, and how you sort of manage and do rollouts of that. So Thai was more focused down that direction. And so also there's another project we have, which is called the Open Application Model, which a way of describing a microservice application and how you put those together. We would love those projects to sort of slowly come together so that you actually have a local developer experience. And in some ways we have dev spaces, which is another way that the Visual Studio team has sort of gone down that direction for sort of local Kubernetes development, I should say, how they're focused there, particularly on Kubernetes development. But I think you'll see things like Thai and Open Application Model slowly come together along with Dapr to help you build something more locally. At this point in time, you know, we'd like to think that Dapr just is an open set of capabilities available to all that you can use from any language and just make it integrated with Visual Studio in terms of the current developer experience you have for whatever language you have. So say you're a Python developer, would like Dapr to be great with a Python developer or Go developer, just in terms of the plugins you have right now. So bigger question, the answer is we're on a sort of a roadmap to making sure that we have a good developer experience around microservices, but it's going to take a time for like projects like Thai and Open Application Model to come together.
Thank you.
All right, so with that, thank you for joining us today. It's wonderful to have you here. We're a little bit over time. The next call will be in 2 weeks' time, and we'll have a whole bunch of other demos then, probably have a chance for a few more questions. But thank you for joining us today, and see you next time.